Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today I have another dance experts episode, and this time we're bringing in some very interesting other areas of expertise, as you will see. So I'm going to let Jenny introduce herself, and then we're going to talk all about dance, sexuality, the body, etc. I'm really excited for this topic because it's not something that I've touched on yet, so I hope you guys really enjoy this conversation. Thank you, Jenny, for being here.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. So excited to be here. So my name is Jenny, and I use the pronouns she, her. I'm in Seattle, Washington, which means that I reside on the land of the Duwamish tribe. And I am a licensed mental health counselor and a somatic experiencing practitioner. I also research purity culture and its impact on the body, and through that have come to focus a lot on religious sexual shame and sexual abuse and how that shows up in individual bodies, and then how that impacts our collective bodies as well. And so I'm deeply passionate about using movement and dance to help individuals and communities find their way back to their bodies and maybe find more free, fluid ways of being, not only while dancing, but in relationship and life and moving through the world.
So much there that we can dive into. I'd love to just ask you first about your own dance life, or like what part dance has played in your life, what part it plays now. Maybe let's start there, and then we're going to bring in the body and these aspects of sexuality too.
Absolutely. So I grew up as a dancer. Jazz was my first love. That was my introduction. I had started as doing gymnastics, but I had scoliosis. And so my doctor was like, I don't think you should continue this route. And so I kind of begrudgingly went to dance class. And then my first class, I was like, oh my gosh, I love this so much. And I didn't know how much I actually needed dance. I think it gave me so much language that I didn't have. And then when I was 14 years old, I fell in dance class and I broke my foot. And it really allowed me to know in some painful ways how much I needed dance. I went through depression and kind of a really hard season in life. And I had thought I would be a professional dancer. That was my goal. And so my life sort of changed trajectories a bit. And to make a very, very long story short, I ended up moving to Uganda. And one of the things that I was doing there was trying to learn how movement and dance were being used therapeutically. And I would often ask, like, what do you do when trauma happens? What do you do when life happens? And everyone would look at me like it was a no-brainer. And they would go, we dance. Like, what do you mean? What do you do? And so that also set me on a journey of learning, why don't I do that? And when I know it's such an important part of my life. And that also kind of led to my deconstruction of race and this phrase of white people can't dance, and how much of our disembodiment and our disconnection with our bodies comes from these systems of oppression that tell us our bodies are robots, they should be productive. And so I learned so much from that time. And so then dance has continued to just be my place of refuge where I go to just move. I also say that I'm a recovering dancer because while I love dancing so much, it's still hard for me sometimes to get out of those perfectionistic, performance-driven ideas. And so I really love kind of your approach to dance and to movement, and kind of this idea of what is it like to bring our humanity into movement and to understand more about where movement comes from and how ancient these practices of dancing together and moving together are. So that's some of how it's been a part of my life.
I love that so much. It's in some ways a very different journey, but in some ways a parallel journey to my own, in terms of, you know, being in the kind of Western model of what dance is, and that kind of, we're doing this for a reason, and the reason is to get better at it, and we want you to have this type of body to do it, and etc., etc. there comes the perfectionist tendency, certainly for me as well. That was a really big thing. And then I did my master's in dance anthropology. Actually, and I think the reason why I chose that is because of dancing Latin American styles. And all of a sudden I found this thing where I was like, wait, but like when you're dancing salsa in a club, not necessarily salsa in ballroom and Latin salsa, I think that's slightly different because that's like competition focused. But I was like, they don't really mind what it looks like necessarily. The most important thing is the lead and the follow, and the dance happens together and it's present and all that kind of thing. I was like, this is really interesting. Got really into that. Danced with a Latin American company for a while, and then was like, I wonder what else is going on in the world with dance. Like what are other people doing? Like what does dance mean in other places? So I love that you talked about Uganda, and I'd love to ask a little bit more about that. But it was this same thing. I went on a trip to Cuba with the dance company that I was working for at that time. And I just saw, I guess, something potentially similar to what you saw, except that it's a completely different dance style and a completely different heritage and all of those things. But yet people in distinct places of the world are using dance for similar like human outcomes, which I find like so fascinating. So I would absolutely love to hear more about Uganda. Like, who were the people that you were learning from? What did they think they were doing as they were dancing? Like, what was their story around it?
Yeah. So I was up in northern Uganda in Gulu. And so I was primarily with the Acholi people. So a big part of my story is that I grew up in purity culture and fundamentalist evangelical Christianity. And so I hold this part of my story with a lot of complexity and nuance. Because I actually moved to Uganda as a missionary when I was 19. And I knew that I wanted to incorporate movement and dance. And so it just so happened that while I was there, I was introduced to a grassroots organization that was teaching children traditional songs and dances. And then with their performances, they were raising money for their school fees. And what I started to notice anecdotally was that these children were kind of able to handle some of the traumas and the experiences that they'd had more robustly than some of the other children in the community. And so when I just started to get curious about that, I learned more of the story of how deeply drums and dancing and movement and rhythm are so much a part of traditional culture. And I think that this is true, although I don't want to make a blanket statement for all Indigenous cultures everywhere. Some of my journey has been like, I am white and I'm not white. I am Slavic and Germanic and Celtic, and my ancestors had their own music and dancing and practices that were eradicated through the Christianization of Europe. And so it's some of that of looking at what are the things that we've always known as human societies and cultures that have been kind of systemically oppressed or eradicated through Christianization or colonization, and this idea that what's actually more important is that your body sit in a chair and go to work and school, rather than these kind of ways of just being bodies and just moving and being together.
Yeah. Let's dive into some of the really difficult questions, which I've thought about, and I don't think I've talked about them yet in terms of this. And it's okay, guys, we're going to get probably a little bit political in this conversation, not because we really want to, but because it's necessary when you're talking about human beings. Like, that's going to come up. Take everything that we're saying, whatever you feel like resonates, take it. Whatever you don't like, you can leave it. But let's just explore this as an open, interesting conversation. Like, Jenny, for you, and the things that you've seen and the experience you've had and the training that you've had, what are some of the things that you attribute the prohibition of dance to? Like, what do you think people were trying to achieve when they started to take dance away from their subjects?
Yeah. So the first thing that comes to mind is Mina Salami. She's an Afro-feminist scholar, and she has this beautiful book called Sensuous Knowledge. And she talks about kind of the juxtaposition of what she calls Euro-patriarchal knowledge, which would be this linear, logical, and it's not that that's bad or wrong, but it's that that has been the hyper emphasis.
Mm-hmm.
And that there's been this eradication of what she would call sensuous knowledge and these embodied ways of knowing. And she says tyrants have always known the more robotic people are, the more easily manipulated they are. And from my own experience and from anecdotally all of the research and the work that I've done, I think that that's really true. When we exist as though we are floating heads, I think it becomes a lot easier for us to perform race, to perform gender in the ways that society would tell us we're supposed to, than if we have these ways of being in our body that aren't binary, that are very nuanced and complex and need a lot more time and space for us to figure out how to be in relation. And I love what you're saying about like the lead and the follow. I think there's so much we can learn in this tension space of dancing and moving that we don't know. And I think some of that I would trace all the way back to, because a lot of my research follows Christian supremacy. And so the ideas of that actually originated with Plato, that our soul and our body were split, that they were separate entities, and then how the Hellenization of Christianity became that the body was lower and lesser, and the soul or the spirit was higher and better. And usually the body was attributed to feminine or to earthy, and the brain or the mind or the spirit was attributed to masculine. And so I think it started back then, and then it snowballed into these ways of creating this really powerful dogma of don't trust your body, trust the priest, trust whoever the probably white male in charge is. He knows what's better than your own body. And I think that really serves systems of power. It doesn't serve as much, I think, our individual and unique bodies.
Yeah, and I don't think it serves our communities either, like the individual too, but the self-governing of like smaller communities or the collaborative effort of smaller communities or even bigger communities. But it's this like, as you said, let's make people more robotic. And the thing that for me is like one of the saddest things about the Western dance world is that the exact medicine that used to be like to take us out of that has been now replaced by making people into dance robots. Like that's the thing. And I like to talk about this nuance because I see a lot in the like wellness spaces and self-development spaces, this kind of adoration of dance, which I love. Like I appreciate that a lot, but there is nuance to it because it's not just dance is good. Like no, dance can be absolutely taught in a way that still makes people into robot, like little ballet robots. Like I felt like a little ballet robot for some of my training.
Totally.
I was like, who am I again? What's like, I wasn't connected to my body. I was just using it to manipulate into different shapes and do what I thought it was supposed to do, and like ignoring the pain signals and et cetera, et cetera. And so many people I know resonate with that kind of having had that kind of training as well. So this idea of that it's easier to control people who are more robotic. I definitely see that. I've lived it myself. And yet there's this part that I also feel like people feel safe there. You know, at least like I see in ballet, and I know for myself, it's like, yeah, but if I can just be the robot that society wants me to be, I won't get criticism, people won't question me, people more or less understand me because we're all kind of like doing the same thing. We understand what the purpose of like the dance is about. And so it's also like the thing that I've struggled with. I'm interested for you, Jenny, with the people you work with, but calling people, like offering this other way of being that's in your body and it's integrated and it's sensual, but it's also wise and all these other things. That invitation is not just like, oh great, that sounds nice, let's go. It's like, but that I don't know if that's safe. right? I didn't know if that's actually safe.
Absolutely. Yeah. So one thing you'll probably learn quickly is my mind thinks in quotes often.
Love
so
that.
the other quote that really resonates with me is from Simone de Beauvoir. And she said that it is always easier, or it's always more comfortable to endure blind bondage than to work for one's liberation. And I think that's so true. I think it is more comfortable and it feels more safe. And to throw out one more, I love Rosa Luxemburg said, those who do not move do not notice their chains.
Yeah.
And it's these ways in which it does feel safer. And I respect people's agency to say, no, this is how I want to live. I don't want to explore that liberation or that freedom. Then it's like, okay, you can do you. But I think for me, I would rather the discomfort and the difficulty and the mistakes of struggling to figure out what freedom could be like than trying to endure blind oppression.
Yeah. Yeah, at least for me, it took enough pain to choose to take those steps. And it sounds like you've had also like a difficult journey to get there. But there is a point where you're like, for me, it was my health more than anything else. And I was just like, there must be another way. Like, surely this is not like genetic. Like, I don't think so, because I look around at other people and I'm like, other people in my family seem healthy. Why is it that I'm having all these problems? And I'm sure we'll get on to talking in a moment about the power of like the pelvis and being allowed to move the hips and all of that kind of thing. Like, I had endometriosis, so there was this like these things going on in my womb that I was just completely unaware of. And I think, and I don't know obviously, but I wonder how much of that was because of this tension I was holding there, because the spine had to be straight and strong and the hips weren't supposed to move and everything was like this. And how much of it also was because I was really running my life from a very masculine energy. And I know some people don't like to phrase like masculine energy, feminine energy. You can label it however you want, guys, but just what I mean by that is this more linear, mind focused, get things done, power through, keep going, don't look around, don't try different things, like just that kind of energy. And then seeing how it actually played out in my body was really surprising. And once I figured out that this is not just something that a medicine is gonna fix, because there wasn't any, it was like either surgery or go back on the pill. And I was like, I don't want to go back on the pill. I don't feel like myself. So in that moment, that's when I was like, what are the alternatives here? Like, what's the other way of moving my body? What's the other way of being in my body? What's the other way of relaxing the tension that I think I've held since being a teenager in my like pelvic floor, my lower abdominals, that maybe there's another way to go around this.
Yep, absolutely.
It's so fun because you get it, you know, like some people look at me and they're like, what are you talking about, that something in the womb would have anything to do with the way that you move or like the tension that you hold in your body? But maybe as someone who is very familiar with this, could you just start to give people a little bit of a breakdown of how the body and the way that we move is actually related to not just our movement and the muscles and the way we move, but more things about who we actually are?
Absolutely. Yeah. So I like to look at our body through three lenses, primarily. And this comes out of my own journey and my own story. And so I often tell people, you might have a totally different part of the body that you nerd out about and geek out about, and that speaks to you. But for me, and I see them as kind of this feedback loop that can lead to more stress and more ailments in the body, or that could lead to more rest and perhaps more wellness in the body. And that is our vagus nerve, our breath, and our psoas muscles. And I'll start with our psoas muscles, because again, for me, I have had chronic hip pain from the time that I was 14, and I had so many different x-rays and doctors, and everyone's like, I have no idea what's wrong with you. And then I learned about the psoas. And it's we have two of them. They connect from the front side of our lower back, right underneath the back side of our ribs. And they move through our belly, through our pelvis. So they connect to a lot of our vital organs. And then they connect to the top inside of our thigh bone, our femur bone. And the psoas are automatic muscles. So if I told you flex your bicep, you could flex your bicep. If I told you flex your psoas, you could not. It'd be like me telling you, like, digest your intestines. It just doesn't happen that way. It's a responsive muscle. And what's really amazing about our psoas is that it's the only muscle that connects our spine to our legs. So it's nicknamed our fight flight muscle because it needs to be activated for us to run, for us to kick, for us to curl into a protective position. And so when our body feels like we are stressed, and our body can't hold story. So our body doesn't know how to differentiate the stress of, I have a very intense dance teacher yelling at me, or I'm being chased by a wolf. It will respond the same way in constricting and tightening our psoas. Which then has fascia and connective tissue around a lot of our vital organs. And so I want to be careful here because there is this dance of causation and correlation. And I'm not a doctor, I'm not like prescribing anything, but again, in my own experience and what I've witnessed time and time again, is that this is really correlated to chronic hip pain, to menstruation issues, to digestion issues, to lower back pain, and then upper back pain, because our bodies start to live in these really tight, constricted ways. And there's connective tissue that connects the top of our psoas muscles to our diaphragm, which is our primary muscle for breathing. So they're sending signals back and forth to one another. If we are taking a really low belly breath, that's communicating to our psoas muscles, we're just hanging out, we're just chilling. If we're taking short, shallow, quick breaths, that's communicating to our psoas, oh, we might be running or fighting or doing something we need to activate. And so this then becomes a feedback loop of how we're breathing is going to impact how we're holding our psoas, and how we're holding our psoas is going to impact our breath. And then both of those are also impacting our vagus nerve, which is responsible for enabling a state of rest and safety in the body. And what's really amazing about our vagus nerve is that 80 to 90% of it is what we call afferent, which means it's sending signals from the body to the brain. So only about 10 to maybe 20% is being sent from the brain to the body. So another way to say that is we cannot think ourselves into a state of rest. So if our psoas is tight and our breath is constricted, our body will be in a state of sympathetic, fight, flight, or dorsal vagal, which is our freeze, appease state. And so all of this, as you can hear, is correlated to a sense of being robotic, being rigid, being frozen in our bodies. And so as we start to engage movement of our pelvis, of our hips, it starts to soften and bring blood flow to our psoas muscles. It starts to deepen our breath. It starts to let our body know, oh, I'm moving in a way that feels pleasurable and good. I must be safe and not being chased by a wolf.
Oh man, I love all of that. And I thought deeply about the vagus nerve and the breath and things, but I haven't thought deeply about the psoas at all. And now I'm like, why not? Like, especially in ballet, I've thought about it a lot in the studio. I've never thought about it in this context. And that makes so much sense to me now. So can we get a little bit practical? Like if I want to now bring some love to my psoas muscles, like how do I go about doing that? Because you said it's not one of the ones that you can be like, I'm going to flex this now or relax it. So how can we go about doing that, Jenny?
Yeah. So I would love to start by saying most of what I have learned about the psoas has come from Liz Cook, and her last name is spelled Koch. And she has a couple books about the psoas and really helpful resources for folks who want to dive even deeper. But one of my favorite things ever is a posture called constructive rest. And there are many different ways to do that. One is to lay on your back with your knees bent and your feet on the floor, to put a yoga block in between your thighs, and then to take a yoga strap and tie it around your calves. So the strap is holding the block up. Okay. And then you just lay there. And what you probably will find is that your inner thighs and your psoas wants to be so helpful to hold that block up, even when that strap is holding it. And so it can take a lot of time and really consciously trying to breathe into the belly to start to soften. Because the theory is like, we don't want to stretch our psoas because that just activates it more. We want to create an environment where it feels held. So that can be one. And if you don't have those props, you can also just lay on your back and bend your knees over a bed or a couch. And that one can be really great too, because it gets some gravity to help you release a little bit more. And then the other one is a lot of kind of more what we would consider sensual movements. So really slow and mindful articulation of our spine. And if we think about this, lordosis, when we're arching our back, is the opposite of this contraction space of holding our psoas. So when we're able to stick out our butt, our hips, all the things that we're told we're not supposed to do in our bodies, it can start to move into our pelvis and tell our psoas muscle, oh, we're doing some new movement. This is fun and creative. And that can also feel really good for sending some love to our hips and pelvis.
Oh, yes. Okay, amazing. I'm going to try the legs on the sofa when we finish this conversation.
Yes, let me know how it is.
I'm totally up for trying that. I love it. And this, when I think about the dance art, particularly the like high art or the more elevated, say, Western dance styles, anything that's come from the aristocracy or that kind of thing, or even I think anything like I'm thinking now, even like Irish dancing. So there's ballet, Irish dance. There are so many where especially for men, I think it's slightly different, isn't it? Where their hip, like how their hips are structured in terms of the spine, and they don't have that reflex to arch. So, but I'm thinking, we were almost expected to mold our bodies into like more of a male way of holding it or standing. I don't know if I'm just making this up. I'm glad you're nodding. I'm not
tracking. Yes.
I'm not completely off in like La La Land, which sometimes happens when I'm thinking out loud. But when I look at, so I have two cats. One is male and one is female. They're brother and sister, and like they'll both do the cat stretch, right, where they kind of like arch their back when they're getting ready to move, which is like, oh, that's a really good idea. My cats always seem to like limber up before they're going to do anything, and I will just like get up like all tight and try and go about my day. But also Kala, who's here with me right now, she does do that thing with her back quite often, and she seems to enjoy it. And I'm like, she's also is there something that so anyway, I'm going to leave it there because I don't really know where these thoughts are about to take me, and I'm not sure. Let's go to you, Jenny, because you have the expertise in this area. But can we talk about like what's going on? Like what's going on with our hips? Why are we scared to like arch? Why do we like do these things? And we can bring it now into the sexuality place. I think that's where this is heading.
I think so. Absolutely. Yeah. And I think you're so right. I think a lot of these methods of dancing have been very constricting, especially for folks who have a female pelvis and need more movement and articulation in that area. And I think I would argue some of this also comes from kind of the construction of white womanhood and the racist, sexist ideas of how white women move which has often desexualized white women, and then has led to stereotypes and tropes of hypersexualizing women of color, who maybe do have dances that move their hips and their bodies in different ways. And so I think that this has been strategic in how we've set up these binaries of how bodies move or don't move. And I think that there is a lot of ailments that can come from constricting the body, both physically and emotionally and psychologically, because we're not fragmented. So what's happening in our bodies will be reflected in our head, and what's reflected in our head will be reflected in our bodies. And I really want to be careful to not to continue the binary language of I think all bodies, regardless of gender, all genders need to move their hips and their psoas muscles. But I think that we've been, as those socialized as women, there's more of a constriction often and less of a freedom, because that is seen as sexualized, and therefore bad in a lot of the Judeo-Christian systems that exist in the West.
Yeah. And I just want to add, just like as soon as we're doing the caveats to what I was saying about ballet and things, that doesn't mean that if you dance ballet and you love it, it doesn't mean that you're doing anything wrong, or like you have to like go and do a difference. Not at all. Like, this is totally what works for you. And I realize I've probably made this sound like ballet's the bad guy. Ballet is not the bad guy, and you can totally do ballet in a way that works for your body, whatever body you have. But I think hopefully these conversations will just bring extra elements so that people can consider, oh, well, yeah, like, let me notice actually after I finish a class, like, how do I feel in that area of my body? Or like, what does go on with my digestion after I've done a really hard class? Or like, how do I sleep that night? Or whatever it is, but just getting curious about what's going on in the body.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I take ballet classes, and I've always thought of, me personally, I've always thought of ballet as like taking my vitamins. It's not my first love, but I think it's good for my technique. But yeah, and I actually just spent Sunday, we have this thing in Seattle called CPAM, and it's a medical clinic with physical therapists and doctors that come together once a month to donate their services to dancers and performing artists. Wow. And so I just spent all day in the clinic with various professional or non-professional dancers coming in. And yeah, we kept saying the same thing. It's not that what you're doing is bad or wrong, but how might your body want to counter? So if you spend all day turned out, what does your body want to do at night? Maybe you do some cat cows and you turn in and you really move your hips in a different way. Maybe you do some twerking that lets you actually move your pelvis and your hips in ways you haven't been doing in class or rehearsal. And so I think about it more as this rhythm of, I can do this type of dance. Can I also step into some things that might be new or different and exciting for my nervous system?
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I think it also requires us to broaden our, like, there are so many, you just mentioned twerking there, and I think it's such a good example because there are so many judgments. Like, it is unfortunate because, again, I feel like the dance world in many ways has taken a lot of these kind of external power structures and just imposed it into the dance world. So we do have these it's even like supremacy issues within dance, within different dance styles, and how we view other dances and how we view people who aren't at a professional level versus people who, like, I've been fighting for, like, I wonder how long it is now, probably like 8 years, for like adult ballet is a thing and people should be allowed to dance ballet even if they're not little girls waiting to be professional or professional. So I've been like, hashtag adult ballet for a long time. But I find it so, I find it interesting, and I understand it because we've been trained in a atmosphere, I think, of fear and competition. So we're just like, anything that's not this thing is a threat. No. And then what happens though, if you're like, you know what, my thing can exist alongside other things, what would happen if I was like, what would happen if I tried to twerk? Like, what would that actually, what is just the curiosity and the open-mindedness? But at least for me, I think my stepping stones were easier because salsa has just enough of the hold that I felt like, oh, okay, that's okay. And then I went into bachata and it's a little bit more sensual. So like my stepping stones were easier, but I'm thinking now, like, pure ballet person twerking, like that's a big
that's the binary. Yeah.
but it could be really fun and really like enlightening to think about that. So I just invite anyone listening right now or watching to just think, what are the dance styles that I judge? What are the dance styles that I think are like, and I don't know what words are coming to mind right now. Is it that you're thinking, oh, they're just not as good, or they're dirty, or they're whatever, like chaotic, or I'm not sure, I'm just making up words here, but that will give us information as well about how we judge ourselves. I might go that far. I don't know. What
Absolutely.
do you think,
Jenny? Yeah. Yeah. It's amazing how much you'll learn how you constrict your body when you start to try to dip into those other things. And I would say that's a place to have a lot of gentleness and kindness for your body, because you've probably been trained or at least socialized into various ways that are good or not good to be in your body. And so the feelings of I'm doing something wrong or this is bad, those are normal feelings. And they might show up, and try to see if there's anything else online. Like, and is there any part of this that might feel good? Or is there any part of this different style of music that my body likes? And maybe both get to be present.
Yeah. I love that so much. Just allowing space for the both. And from your like personal experience, do you find you can connect to like different parts of you through different movement, or like what's been your like kind of insights in this from your own exploration?
Yeah, that's a great question. I definitely think so. I think that, I have my own story of being really robotic and really malleable and really pliable, and then therefore really complicit with systems of harm that I have both been harmed in, and I have also harmed in and benefited from. And I think that as I have explored being in my body in new ways, it's allowed me to get in touch with more of my healthy aggression. It's allowed me to know more of what I am able and willing to tolerate and what I'm not. And I would say, I primarily have worked with white cisgender women. And so often I think it's very hard for those of us socialized in that category to be okay with our anger. It's like, you can be sad, but sorry, had a little fly here. You can be sad. That is socially acceptable, but you cannot be angry. And that can feel really dangerous. And so I think getting to be in different types of postures and movements that feel really big and really strong. It's like the opposite of first position. And again, not that that's bad or wrong, but that is a very much like buttoned up, constricted, tight, holding my pelvis position. So then if I come into like a parallel second and I stick my hips out and I feel my thighs and I get to be in my body in a different way, I think it has made me more comfortable with myself and with the things that I want to do with this body and in this body, and not feel like I need to wait for the next person to give me permission, but that I get to find that responsibility and that agency within myself.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I want to especially say thank you for just acknowledging the hurt that was done to you, but also participate, because when we're in these systems, we must, I think, take responsibility for both of those sides and not only focus on one. And that's in some ways that's where the real freedom is, because otherwise you're still on just the victim side and like no power. But when we see like, no, I see that as well in the way that I think I said at the beginning that I tended to go much more into my masculine energy. So I never had a problem with being angry. I had a problem with like controlling it, in fact. And just owning the fact that I can't just say, oh, that's a defense mechanism, because it is, but I've hurt people a lot through that side of things. And just hopefully, even just me and you today saying that will allow other women to hear, like, of course we've done harm. It's okay. We all do harm every day as human beings by accident. And sometimes we upset people or disappoint people in order to look after ourselves. And all of that is okay. And all of that is welcome. And as dancers, you know, I think there is this, especially in ballet and that kind of thing, there is still that remnants of the purity thing of like, I'm a pure, perfect person. If I can just get my body to look like this, and if I can just say the right thing in all of those aspects, then I'll achieve that thing where I can never do anyone harm, and I'll finally be, at least for me, this is like, and I'll finally be safe, because I'll finally be able to be the perfect person that for me, this is just my story, that a man wants, and that then I'll never have to worry about anything again, and I'll just have achieved it, and then I can just relax. And it's like, that's not how life works. Like, you have to learn to relax in the journey, because ultimately the end of this journey is death, or whatever you believe comes after that. That's fine, but like, that's one part of it. And so if I can't learn to relax now, if I can't learn to feel safe while I'm dancing and trying to improve, if I can't learn to feel safe within a relationship, even when I don't have control, and I know there are other women who are equally and more beautiful than me and whatever, like, if I can't learn to feel safe in that, and now I realize, and people are probably sick about me talking about the body in some ways, because I'm always banging on about it, but it's like, that is the path. It's one of the paths, but like, it's a path at some point that you're going to have to tread, the journey into your own body and the acceptance of your own body. And I always come back to the fact that we are animals. We're incredibly kind, compassionate, collaborative, etc. animals. But if you cannot square with the animal part of who you are, you're always going to suppress it and not be able to access the things like that you said, like access the things like, you know what, my animal actually wants to say no, or those kinds of things. And it's important.
Absolutely. I know you mentioned your cats. I often say my dog is my greatest teacher of what it is to have a body. Like, she's just unapologetically her emotions, her needs, her wants, her feelings. And I hope we can find and create a world where that gets to be more and more true for all bodies.
Yeah. What are you most excited about at the moment, Jenny, either in the work that you're doing or in some research that you're undertaking at the moment? Like, what's the thing that kind of excites you on a work basis at the moment?
So I am currently working on a book that's out of a research project that I've been doing. And it's looking at what I'm calling the transnationalizing of purity culture. So I was one of many, many, many young white women that were socialized in the United States, particularly within this idea of purity culture and this hyper-emphasis on chastity and virginity that ended up becoming missionaries or development workers internationally, particularly in Black and Brown nations. And so what I'm exploring is, what about the way that we were socialized and our subjective experience convinced us as 18, 19-year-olds with no training to go step into positions of power, and looking at that both on a personal level, but also on a collective level of what was happening, and how the tropes of young white women have continued to be used to propel white supremacy and colonization. And the access to power and privilege that I had that went unquestioned. And so I've been doing different interviews with folks who decided to become missionaries or development workers, as well as literary research. And kind of really trying to understand more of the things that, again, we've been socialized into and might not even be consciously aware of. So that has been taking up a lot of my energy and my time, and then has also allowed me to stay accountable to my own movement practice. I've just recently, since before the pandemic, gotten back into like in-person movement classes with dance or hot yoga or different things that have just allowed me to care for myself as I'm engaging some pretty difficult and activating ideas and material.
Wow. Yeah, I love so much the topic of that book, and I'm excited. Let me know when it comes out, please. Because this is a question that I've been thinking about in terms of dance as well. And I actually wrote it, but like we didn't know that we were going to talk about this topic today. But I wrote a post like a few days ago about colonization in dance, and what I mean by that is not the kind of old school colonization of like going somewhere and taking over, but this idea here in the West that I see sometimes of like ballet is the ultimate, therefore all dancers all over the world should train in ballet. And I'm like, why do you think that? Like, why do you believe that the way we move and the way we use our bodies is better than the way that other people in other places move and use their bodies? Like, that's really the question that we need to answer. And if it doesn't get asked within the power structures and the people that are training in it, like you just assume, oh, of course, because everybody wants to be like us. And I'm like, everybody does not want to be like us. Like, people do not want to have endometriosis and all the injuries and all the weird things that go along with like training in these dance styles. And it doesn't mean that like that everyone has that. Obviously, some people have amazing experiences training in ballet and other things, and that's wonderful. But it doesn't mean that that's what has to be spread all over the world. And then simultaneously, I also appreciate that there are many countries and cultures in the world who do want to learn that, and that's fine. So, but it should always be like a choice. It should never be an assumption that like the way that we do things is the way that everyone should do things. So it's interesting that you just brought that up now, because it's something that's been on my mind as well.
I want to read that. That sounds amazing.
It's something that, yeah, it's like we don't question it. It just, we go along and it's fine and it's normal to not question it. You know, like I'm 35 now. This is the first time that I'm really like questioning it and putting it out there. And so again, like you said, be gentle, like no shame, compassion, like yes, but it's so awesome that you're asking these questions in those like specific areas where you have like have lived experience and seen firsthand like how it's done and how it can happen to the most well-meaning and caring people if the structures are there to create that kind of power dynamic. So I always find that really interesting, and at some point I want to get into learning more about power in dance, because I think it's important, because I talk a lot about empowerment, and now I'm like, what do you actually mean by that though, Natalie? Like, you say that word, but what do you actually mean by empower? Like being empowered, because there are so many layers to it. Can I ask you, just as a final question, like how you think about the term empowered? Because I see you now, and like after this conversation, like Jenny seems like a pretty empowered person, but what does that mean to you, and what's been your journey in getting to that place?
Yeah, I think when I hear empowered, I think about agency. And so a lot of what I talk about is the difference between living from the outside in and the inside out. And I think a lot of the ways that we are socialized is to live from the outside in. How am I performing? How am I acting in ways that I should be? And I think living from the inside out is how I would think about being empowered, of how am I living into my truth? And another way I think about that is integrity. And I love the second definition of integrity is being wholehearted. So it's not about this binary right, wrong. It's about, am I connected to all parts of me that get to be able to be responsible for whatever decision I make? And sometimes that means that decision will come with accountability and repair. And sometimes that means that decision will come with reward and really amazing, beautiful things. And I always say, like, I don't expect anyone to do this work, especially when we're talking about race and power and all of these really sticky subjects. I don't think anyone can do this perfectly. And I think we are responsible to be committed to repair and to learning. So that in itself, I think of as a dance, as this place of tension where we push and we pull and we move and we might step on each other's toes and we might do all of these things, but it allows us to find more and more of our connection to ourselves and one another.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I love how you made a dance analogy out of that. The thing that I'm taking away, and I know I'm taking away, like, there's so many things from what you said today. The Psoas thing for sure is like, has blown my mind, really. And that doesn't happen that often, because I feel I've had a lot of conversations. So thank you so much for that. But also just this idea of being allowed to own any pain that we have accidentally or intentionally put onto other people, and do this work to take responsibility and accountability and to repair and to believe that we can keep moving forward in that direction without having to do it perfectly, and that's okay. And it's something, again, that is on my mind, because this is also true in just like one-to-one relationships. Like 2 days ago, me and my husband had a really big argument, and this was what was making me think about. So if you are someone that believes you're a bad person if you hurt someone else, like if you say something that's honest and whatever, and the other person gets hurt, if you have this belief, I'm a bad person now, you go into self-protect mode. So you've just said something that's hurt the other person, which is fine. Like, that is their responsibility to deal with that. But if you can stay open and you're like, I've done something that hurt them. We all hurt each other sometimes because we're not the same person. We have different thoughts and ideas and brains. If we can be in repair mode, I love how you said repair and responsibility, then that means, hey, how can I stay open to this connection and help them through this difficult hurt moment, which wasn't unavoidable if I was going to be true to myself. That was. Anyway, I think people know what I'm trying to say. I think I did a double negative there. That didn't make sense. But just that, I hope that this has been, like, kind of helpful for people, because it certainly has been for me, and helping me link these different ideas together and see how I always come back to this thing that what happens in the micro seems to happen in the macro as well, and that these patterns are like between two people and also between countries and continents and civilizations, and it's so fascinating. So Jenny, I love the way your mind works. I'm so like, oh my goodness, it was fascinating. Thank you so much, and I hope that we can stay in contact and continue these conversations.
Yes,
thank
please.
you for coming on and talking to me here.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for watching, everyone, and I will see you in my next video.